and sex addicts don't. What they do is experience is a mental withdrawal. It's kind of like with weed. You can't get addicted to weed because you're not like convulsing on the floor, shaking. Like you do have some sort of symptoms, but it's just not the same type of thing.
Right. Like you can want something really, really badly and feel like you're being drawn to it without it being a genuine addiction.
So Captain Jay Barker, who's a spokesman for Cherokee County Sheriff's Office, he said that Long said that attacking the spas was a temptation for Long that he wanted to eliminate because he is a sex addict. So it didn't have anything to do with race. It was that these women were giving happy endings. These women were giving happy endings at massage parlors. And so he wanted to kill them because they are temptress seductresses that must be eliminated so that he breaks his addiction. Okay. Experts say that sex addiction is a classic excuse to exonerate white men and pathologize misogyny. It discounts racial dynamics and it affects the way the public understands the issues like sex addiction and mass murder.
I think that was something we learned when
Harvey Weinstein, Chris D'Elia.
So when I first learned that sex addiction wasn't real, i.e. wasn't accepted as like a genuine thing by
the DSM.
The DSM.
Yeah. So I'll say that now going into is sex addiction real?
Oh, sorry.
In 1987, the American Psychiatric Association added sex addiction to its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, short for DSM. And they come out in different volumes like DSM-3, 4. The latest one, DSM-5, took that out of the manual in 2012. They refused to add it back in. So it was formally a mental disorder or addiction, whatever. It is no longer that. And there was I'll start first with, so sex does not affect the brain the same way that substance abuse and gambling does. We have talked on this podcast before about how sex is like a drug, or love is like a drug.
Yeah.
Where you get those feel good hormones that come out and it creates like a pleasure sort of response. And when you're primed for it, you then crave it. And people who get into toxic relationships are constantly chasing that high. And there was a recent study that I think they need to have more studies to validate it that kind of prove that it can be like an addiction. It's very unsubstantiated in the field because people with addictions like gambling, alcohol, cigarettes have a physical response to
like the withdrawal of
it. They experience physical withdrawal, and sex addicts don't. What they do is experience is a mental withdrawal. It's kind of like with weed. You can't get addicted to weed because you're not like convulsing on the floor, shaking. Like you do have some sort of symptoms, but it's just not the same type of thing.
Right. Like you can want something really, really badly and feel like you're being drawn to it without it being a genuine addiction.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So Dr. Nicole Prouse, founder of the Liberos Research Lab, she conducted a study that showed that the brain responds differently to sex when compared to smoking and other addictions. So when addicts look at their poison of choice, there's a certain brain wave that appears that is not apparent in scans and whatever, that is not apparent for people who claim to be sex addicts. And they're very careful about this wording, people who self-identify as sex addicts.
Because that is really how it is. People claim to be a sex addict as almost a scapegoat for terrible things that they do.
Yeah. And people who identify as sex addicts are usually raised in conservative and religious environments. They're usually white. This fits Long, the perp. He is white and he is a devout Christian. And this is also usually in communities where any natural horny desire is shamed. So when people try to fix that with treatment centers, it only aggravates the symptoms and makes it worse because they're, under this shroud of secrecy. So president of the Asian American Psychological Association, Rochelle Concepcion, says that accepting sex addiction as the motive and not acknowledging the victims, as she says, colliding dynamics of class, immigration status, and gender that impact the communities most at risk for physical and sexual violence is 2 thumbs down. And here's what she says directly. Quite frankly, it's really difficult to attribute the atrocious behaviors to an addiction, especially when you look at the demographics of a majority of those who were murdered. Race and gender do play a role in this. So just to name a few people where high profile people who have used sex addiction as a scapegoat to get themselves out of jail time. Never forget Chris D'Elia, who we just talked about. He said that sex controlled his life and he has a problem. Harvey Weinstein did it. Ted Bundy did it. This guy, Ariel Castro, could be Arielle, but I'm differentiating it for my name. Tiger Woods, Anthony Weiner.
Yeah.
He describes himself as a very sick man for a very long time. And so they try to get out of jail by saying, I will go to a treatment center to get better.
Right. It's like a mental health defense, but joke's on you. It's not a mental health issue. It's
not a mental health issue. The treatment centers have not been proven through studies to actually help. And it doesn't address the role of misogyny in sex addiction that shifts the onus from the perpetrator to the victim, like stereotyping Asian women as stereotyping Asian women as temptresses and manipulative dragon ladies who deserve to be murdered.